Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Allison Boyle, and welcome to At Home with Quest. I've come on a little bit early. Hi, I think my microphone's just gone on. So, hi, I'm Allison Boyle, and welcome to Quest Connect on August the 1st. I'm a little bit early because I wanted to test my equipment. I've got a little bit of a delay time before the camera and the microphone actually starts. So I'll wait till 2 o'clock and then we'll make a start. Good afternoon, Glyn. Um, Lovely to have you join me. And I would love if you can send me a little thumbs up to let me know that you can hear me and that you can see me. That would be fantastic. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Alexandria. Hi. Okay, it's just turned 2 o'clock. And I know that there's a couple of people come online, so that's fantastic. I'm making an assumption that you can hear me and see me. And welcome, welcome. It was an absolutely beautiful day in Sydney this morning, and it's just turned very cloudy and looks as though that we might even get a little bit of a storm. So interesting how quickly things can change. So today I thought we might talk a little bit about acting skillfully when conflict arises. And my motivation for picking this topic is because obviously with many of us in lockdown and many thousands of people are living, working, schooling, studying, trying to have some leisure time, all at home. And we're spending more time together and we might be bumping into each other a little bit more than normal. And it's easy in that context to see how there's an opportunity for tension, there's an opportunity for disagreements to emerge. So I thought that could be the territory that we might explore together today and how we can kind of act skillfully when that's happening. Today's not necessarily designed to explore long-standing conflict, where there's been an issue for a long time or complex issues. And certainly not, we're not heading into the territory of when things become really abusive. I want us to stay at the point of kind of everyday conflict, everyday niggles, because addressing conflict at that early stage is when we actually have the capacity to perhaps sort things out so that it doesn't escalate. The types of things that I thought we might look at is what is conflict and how do we recognize it? Talk a little bit about conflict that we might be in with ourselves and then others. And we'll talk a little bit about how to start a challenging conversation and explore some tips for negotiation. So I hope that that sounds like something that you might be interested in. And before we get into the meat and the sandwich, let's just do what we usually do at Quest and just spend a few moments just coming to our senses, just being present. And this little practice can be a very useful one if there is a lot of tension around, because anything we can do to bring us just back into the present moment and to help settle ourselves is going to be a useful thing if we're looking at having a challenging conversation. So perhaps you can just settle into your environment and just relax. And if it's available to you and you're happy to close your eyes, please do so. If not, maybe just lower your gaze just in order to defocus a little bit. And perhaps we can start by taking some just conscious breaths. Perhaps a little sigh and just letting go of everything that's gone before. Any conversations or busyness. Becoming aware of your bottom on the seat, your feet on the floor, touch of clothing against your skin, movement of clothing as you breathe, anything that you can touch. Now take your awareness to anything you can see, even behind closed eyes. Light, dark, squiggles. And perhaps letting go of any kind of need to see anything. There's nowhere else you need to be. There's nothing else you need to do. Just be here. Notice any tastes, any sensations that might be in the mouth, and any aromas that might be in the air. And as you do this practice, you'll notice that thoughts come. That's okay, no problem. Just let them be there and just float through the field of your awareness. As you gently just bring your awareness now to anything you can hear. The sound of my voice, any sounds within the room, any sounds within your own body. Perhaps letting your hearing just run out of the room, and see if you can pick up sounds that are a bit more distant. Just allowing the sounds to come and go. Just allowing the sound to float through the field of your awareness with no effort whatsoever. And again, just bring your awareness back to your breath. Just allowing yourself to settle. And just note whatever's present with you right now. You know that we're going to be talking about conflict. What does that perhaps bring up for you? Do you already have any tension around that? If there is, just see if you can release it a little bit. There's nothing you need to do about any issue or any conflict. Just see if you can release, let go. As you bring your awareness now back into the room. That's nice. So it's lovely to be with you as we explore this territory together of conflict. So, who's ever had a conflict? Who perhaps wishes at times they dealt with it better? Okay, so welcome to the human race, and you're probably at the right talk. So let's see if we can explore some of these issues together. First of all, conflict's normal. Most of us bring up some negative connotation when we mention conflict, maybe based on some past experience, but conflict is incredibly normal. Conflict's about differences in ideas, differences in beliefs, needs, values, desires. Sometimes differences can fit really well together, but sometimes there can be a clash. And often, these day-to-day differences can often be stepped around. Often we don't even need to always get into it. But when there's an additional stress added, such as lockdown, such as the worry of COVID and the uncertainty, such as the pressure that may be emerging around financial issues, um, change to health status, when there's additional stress, sometimes these differences can manifest in subtle and insidious ways. They can build up, or sometimes they can kind of erupt a little bit like the metaphorical volcano that we often talk about at Quest. So, how do you actually know that you might be in a conflict or there might be a conflict emerging? And if you want to, perhaps you might even um, think of a conflict that you're currently going through, but again, something kind of quite small, not the worst conflict you've ever had. And see if you can recognize that conflict happens at different stages, but like a ladder. We can think of it a ladder of conflict. And the first stage might be just that there's a bit of discomfort. Maybe nothing's been said yet, but things just don't feel quite right. You might not be able to identify a specific problem, but you just feel a bit uncomfortable. You're not sure why. Maybe at this stage there's some options just to sit with it or to kind of explore it within yourself, or maybe explore it with another person. Is everything okay between us? Usually at that low level stage, that's when our differences are really amenable to things like problem solving, and we'll talk about that later. Next, there might be an incident. Maybe there's a short, sharp exchange that takes place, leaving you feeling a bit upset or with a result that you didn't want. Then the next stage in the ladder might be misunderstanding. This is often when motives and facts might be misperceived. And this can often result in kind of those circular or looping discussions that don't actually go anywhere. We can get into that he said, she said. Your thoughts are now maybe frequently returning to the problem. Misunderstandings often happen too when there's a difference or a disparity in the information that perhaps both parties have. And if it's a conflict that's emerging or a misunderstanding over information, we might call data, the good news is that at that level, that can quite easily be resolved. The next stage in the ladder, we're getting into tension, and this is where the relationship might be a constant source of worry or concern. Your mind is really returning to the problem, and the way you feel about the other person or the other party starts to really change for the worst. And then crisis. This is when really behaviour's affected. Normal functioning is difficult. There might be a major rupture and some acting out, even with using words that's difficult to take back, or even there could be a rupture, and this is when violence can happen. It's a crisis. Okay. So today we want to focus on some of those earlier stages of conflict, from recognizing tension maybe through to kind of misunderstanding level, rather than those more serious, heading towards serious tension or crisis levels. Can conflict be productive? Often we don't think of conflict being productive, but in actual fact, if it's handled well, conflict can be hugely productive. It can be incredibly creative. If we think about work teams, for example, the more diversity of opinion you have often gets really great results. Often, even when there's been a bit of a disagreement between you and another person in an interpersonal conflict, then again, if handled well, it can promote trust. It can actually bring us close together and create a deeper understanding, of both parties. So conflict can be productive it can be a good and necessary thing. The problem, however, is that conflict can really escalate quite quickly. We can go from tension to kind of misunderstanding very quickly. Our minds work in less than a blink of an eye in conflict. We start to form beliefs, we start to make assumptions about other people's behavior and motives. And that really escalates things pretty quickly. And let me tell you just how quickly this can happen. I'd like to share a personal story, and this is going back now probably 10, 12 years, maybe even a little bit more. And the lead in to this story, which I've never told publicly before, be gentle with me. All you need to know at this stage is that my husband never ever signed any contract to say that it was his job to empty the dishwasher. Okay, that's all I need you to know right now. So about 10 or 12 years ago, most days, most of the time, my husband got up first, went out to work first, and most days emptied the dishwasher before he left. But on the days that he didn't empty the dishwasher, very quickly I began to notice that I was having quite a big reaction about this. It did happen at a time where, for reasons I will explain later, I had taken on a little bit more of the household duties, as well as working. But on the days that this dishwasher wasn't emptied, which were infrequent, very quickly I found myself having a huge reaction, to the extent that even when I felt the weight of the dishwasher alerting me to the fact that it wasn't emptied, I could explode. I felt rage, I felt red hot anger. Sometimes I acted really quickly and I would pull the dishwasher out, clanking all the glasses together. On a couple of occasions they cracked. Other times I found myself smashing my hand down on the bench top and shouting out some expletive. Fortunately, there was no one else home, just saying. So as time went on, I kind of realised that obviously this was quite disproportionate. And I thought, I need to look at what's happening here. So let's just step out of the story for a minute. I'll come back to it. What was actually going on? Okay, first, there's the experience, feeling the weight of the dishwasher not being emptied. Then, what happened? I had a huge reaction. Third, what assumptions were I making? What story was I telling myself? And here's the thing. The story that I began to tell myself very, very quickly was that this dishwasher not being emptied somehow equated with a lack of respect. I'll just leave you with that. We've gone very quickly to a relatively minor inconvenience of a dishwasher not being emptied to a conclusion about lack of respect. So if I'm working on a premise of lack of respect, how much is that going to fuel my reaction? Okay. So let's just look at the difference between a reaction and a response. And you'll have heard Quest facilitators talking about this many times. This is fundamental to the Quest teachings. A reaction is a reactivation of a physiology, the fight and flight response, that you've experienced before, and an action that you've done before. It's automatic, it's quick, it's in less than a blink of an eye, where we make a faulty conclusion based on an assumption. It's where we flip our lid. It's where we don't have access to creative thinking and problem solving, okay, that's gone offline. And we're just reacting from the emotional, more primitive part of our brain. A response, on the other hand, is literally our ability to respond. Our ability to respond relies on us being in a relatively calm state so that we have access to the thinking part of our brain, the part of our brain that creatively problem solves, that can be creative, that has wisdom, that can engage in humor, all those juicy qualities of life. This is where we can take responsibility for our life and for our actions. No one says take more reactability, do they? I'm sure you've heard us saying before that what lies between a reaction and a response? How do we get to a state of being responsive when we're in a reaction? First thing, awareness. The gold, if you like, of awareness. Realizing that we're having a reaction. Having that awareness gives us the ability to choose. So the awareness is often what's happening in the body. You know, the heartbeat has speed up, muscles tense, ready for action. There's a lot of muscular tension. There might be acting out, whatever. So at this stage, back to the dishwasher, at least I knew that I was having an overreaction quite regularly to a relatively minor trigger. Okay, I've now at least engaged the thinking part of my brain. I now stand a chance of having a little bit more choice in this situation. I also became aware that what was driving this really wasn't so much the dishwasher not being emptied. It was the fact that I had decided that that equated with lack of respect. Okay, so I'd at least made a connection. Next time it happened, I was able to catch it. I was able to feel the feeling. I still felt the rage. I still wanted to act out, but I didn't. I swear to you, I stood there holding on to that dishwasher. And I just took a few breaths and I kept asking myself the question, is any part of this true? Is it true? Is there any part of this, the story that you're telling yourself, is it true? I repeated it over and over and over in my head until I'd settled enough to at least walk away from the dishwasher and sit down. I calmly sat down. Well, no, I wasn't that calm, actually. Relatively calm. I sat down and I said to myself, is there any other situation in this relationship where you feel disrespected? What evidence have you got? And in my case, I was very fortunate because there was no evidence whatsoever. None. Absolutely none. So on the one hand, I suppose that's good news, but on the other hand, it left this huge kind of conundrum, really, about what was actually going on. And I have to be honest, when I came up with that, there's no evidence whatsoever, I actually started to cry. So I had this big release and then I started to cry. I was like a child sitting there, not knowing what was going on, but just feeling awful. So gradually, what became apparent to me, and it didn't happen straight away, but there's the backstory. Okay, what was really going on? What was really going on was that maybe 6 to 9 months before, my husband, who was working full time, started studying. He started doing an MBA, something that was going to take up a lot of brain power, a lot of time, a lot of energy. And he had said to me 6 or 9 months previously, I'm going to be pretty preoccupied with this, and I'm probably not going to have the same time as I used to do my fair share of the housework. We used to come home on a Thursday night, do the housework together, no big deal. He said, I'm not going to be able to do it. And I don't want this to be a difficulty between us. What do you think if we get someone in to help us with cleaning? Therein, I had another reaction, not an angry reaction, but that reaction that comes from all those beliefs that we have about ourselves. So up came all those what we sometimes call second nature beliefs. Up came, oh my goodness, we're both from a really working class background. We're not the sort of people that have people coming in and doing our cleaning. My goodness, no. And then the other story, I'll do it myself because, well, they probably wouldn't do as good a job as I would do anyway, would they? Then the very Scottish part came in. Well, we're not going to pay someone to come in and do some cleaning in, and this is the truth, a 2-bedroom apartment. I can do that, like no bother. Because even now, I mean, my 85-year-old mother who still lives in Scotland still does her own cleaning. How could I possibly have someone come in and do the cleaning? Up came all those automatic beliefs. It wasn't an argument between us. I just said, no, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I'll do it. And I did it. And I did it well. But I did it with an accumulation of, yes, you've guessed it, the R word, resentment. Resentment had obviously been building up for a period of time. So just taking a little out from the story again, American neuropsychologist Rick Hanson talks about resentment having some particular qualities. That there's a quality of feeling, when you're stuck in resentment, feeling wounded. I certainly felt wounded. In fact, I felt a bit like a child, actually. There's a quality of feeling wronged, and I really did feel wronged. There's a quality of injustice, that it's not fair, and often that can be apparent by the use of the word should, like it just shouldn't be like this. This dishwasher should be emptied or whatever, right? Or there can be the perception. I mean, mine was about a perception, really, rather than a genuine injustice. He talks about it being a social emotion, so it involves someone else, and often has the quality there of there's anger. Okay, there's anger that may not be able to be expressed. I mean, I was expressing the anger, but I wasn't expressing it directly. I didn't even know what the source of the anger was at the time. I tell that story because I want to make the point of who was I really in conflict with? Really. I was in conflict with myself. Back to the conflict ladder. I'd probably been in tension for a long period of time, and then the volcano just exploded. The circumstances had changed, and I obviously now felt really resentful, but unable to name it, express it, even know that maybe that's what it was. I don't know. And it had escalated, and over time it eventually found its eruption in the volcano. So the resentment, the old wound, the hurt, the injustice, all that was bubbling underneath the surface. And there's the volcano that erupted. There's a saying in conflict resolution, it's never about what it's about. So when we have all these niggles, these difficulties, these overreactions, often it can seem so trivial, like I can almost hear you, and I wouldn't blame you sort of saying, oh, getting all that worked up about a dishwasher, come on, really? But it's never about what it's about. So what's underneath the surface? So just at this stage, let's look at some top tips just at this stage. Recognize rather than ignore early stages of conflict. Act early, but do some self-reflection first. What might I be contributing? What assumptions might I be making? Is that possible? Deal with your own emotion first. Don't act when triggered. Could you imagine if there had been someone else in the house at the time when I was got the madness of the dishwasher? Can you imagine if I'd tried to have that conversation at the time in that state? It wasn't going to go well. So don't speak when triggered. create a lot of space, try and settle yourself down. Sure, identify the feeling rather than act out of it. Breathe, do whatever it takes to get yourself calm and resourced. You know, talk to someone, talk to a friend, write down what you're feeling, do whatever it takes. Timing. If you're going to bring up any issue with someone else, make sure that both you and yourself are settled enough, because as we know, we get anger deaf. So there's going to be a difficulty in listening and taking in information if you're both anger deaf. Prepare yourself and even rehearse the conversation. That's where we're going to now. And if at any time you're in it with someone else, if things start to escalate, if you start to feel triggered, do something to take a break. Okay. Right now, I've got nothing helpful to say. Can we take a break? I need to have a break before we can speak. Okay. So always have that in place. So look, just before we move on, and we're going to move on to actually how to prepare ourselves to have a challenging conversation. You know, if there's anything you want to post, or I'm just wondering if, does this resonate with you in some ways? I'm sure I'm not the only one that has conflict with myself, but it'd be really interesting just to hear a little bit from you. So to prepare for having a challenging conversation, it can be helpful to just have a little bit of an idea about your own conflict handling style. And I've got some notes here that I'm going to refer to. And none of these styles are wrong. So it's not making it right or wrong. And sometimes our style changes depending on the context. But some common styles, and I got this from a consultant called John Graham that I worked with and did some training with many, many years ago. Accommodating. So accommodating is normally when we value the relationship more than getting our own way. It can be really useful to use accommodation when the issue doesn't really matter to me very much, but it's quite a big deal for you. It's more important to the other person. The downside of accommodation can mean peace at any cost, and sometimes you never really talk about the real issues. Competing. Competing is more about when we take a position of I'm right, you're wrong, or things must happen in a particular way, sometimes called win-lose. Now, this style can be really useful in an emergency situation or in a situation where there's safety. This is where you say to your kids, no, you don't run out into the middle of the road. This is when what I say goes, when there's a safety issue. But again, if overused, it can build resentment because the other person doesn't feel heard. Avoiding. Most of us are conflict avoidant. Most of us fall into this category. Most of us have had experiences in the past that didn't go so well, so we kind of like want to avoid it like the plague. Sometimes that might be okay to avoid conflict when the situation doesn't actually have very much to do with you. It might be very wise not to get involved, or if it's unsafe to use any other strategy. But the downside, of course, is that it doesn't really deal with anything and the issues end up escalating, and again, it can build resentment. Compromise. Often we're told that compromise is a great thing, that this is what we have to do. This is where we try and make sure everybody gets a little bit of what they want. But it can have a downside. It can seem like the fair way to go. Everybody at least gets something, and that might be useful when we just can't divide the pieces of the pie up any bigger. There's a good story actually about compromise. There were two sisters in a kitchen, and there was only one orange left in the dish, and both of them wanted the orange. So what did they do? Well, if they compromise, they chopped the orange in half and each got a half. Seems fair. One sister went to the juicer and squeezed herself a very, very small orange juice. And the other sister used the peel of the orange to flavour a cake that ended up having not as much flavour as it could have. Had they both discussed needs, both of them could have had the whole orange. So compromise might be useful in some situations, but often there can be dissatisfaction. Collaboration. Collaboration is like a win-win when we're seeking the best possible kind of outcome. Downside of collaboration is that often it takes a little bit more time. And imagine if we collaborated over absolutely everything, we would kind of get nowhere, right? So it's about our aim being a little bit more flexible. So if you know that, probably like me, you're a bit conflict avoidant, then it's about becoming more flexible with these other styles. I know, for example, that in a work situation, I'm probably most of the time, a bit more accommodating. At home, I can be a bit more competing. I can dig my heels in a bit more. So it's about expanding our repertoire a little bit more. So it can be useful just to know that the style that you use more commonly. It often, as I say, changes from work to home, but what's the style that kind of predominates for you? And what's the other person's style too? That can be useful to think about. Okay, so we've talked about styles. Let's look now at how to prepare to have a challenging conversation. And Mark says, yes, he recognises a lot of this, and I'm very relieved, Mark, that it's not just me. So often it's useful to think about in preparation. First of all is, what's my motivation for having this conversation? And is it something that the other person can actually do something about? Is it within their sphere of influence? Because probably it's not going to go so well if it just serves to get it off my chest and if I'm just going to use blame, for example. So that's a useful question. It's also useful for you to ask, what are my needs in this situation? Rather than my wants, what are my deep level needs? And this is interesting because sometimes when we examine this, again, it's never about what it's about. Sometimes we can be less invested in the outcome, and our deeper level need is actually more about the human need for being listened to, being acknowledged, being recognized, those sorts of things, rather than the actual outcome itself. So it can be useful to actually spend some time thinking around that. What are my needs? What are my fears? If I have this conversation, what's my biggest fear? And also what's negotiable and what's not? What can I live with? What's my bottom line in this situation? What do you need from the other person? And here's the most challenging bit. What do you imagine that they might need from you? I'm going to say that one again. Imagine entering into potentially a challenging conversation, having thought through what do you think they might need from you in order for this to go well. Pausing for emphasis, because often when we're entering a challenging conversation, we really don't think about that. I worked as a mediator, would you believe it? But anyway, I worked as a mediator in workplace conflict, and we used to do assessments, and that was one of the questions we used to ask. We used to separate parties and do an assessment, and we used to say, okay, what do you really want out of this mediation? What's your bottom line? What's your needs? What's your underlying needs? And what do you think the other person needs from you? And we used to say, before you come to mediation, really think about that. And are you prepared to give it or contribute to it? There's more than one person involved here, if the conflict isn't just for yourself. So we've got this fabulous, fabulous kind of little recipe at Quest that I'm sure you've heard before for opening up challenging conversation. And it's the I notice, I imagine, I feel. So let's unpack this a little bit. When entering a challenging conversation, it's useful to start with I notice, which is like a neutral, objective description of just what's happening. It's kind of like the bare bones of the facts, if you like. I imagine is perspective taken. I imagine that this is how it might be for you. I feel this is how it is for me. This is what I feel about it. This is my truth. And what I'd like or what I need. And that's the preferred outcome. Okay. So I could have said, I guess, look, I noticed that from time to time the dishwasher hasn't been emptied. I imagine that that just happens on a day that you're busy and maybe late for work. I sometimes feel really quite irritated when that happens. And I'm wondering if we could revisit that discussion that you brought up 9 months ago around perhaps getting a cleaner. Your suggestion, your actually really good suggestion that I blew off 9 months ago. I'm wondering if we could revisit that. Okay. So the gold in this, why is this really, really useful? Well, just stating the facts creates some neutrality. And also starting with I, because often in a challenging conversation, there can be the temptation of starting with you. And when we start with you, like you never empty that dishwasher. You always leave the wet towels on the floor. You never give me equal time on the computer. Immediately, the other person has to go on the defensive, don't they? Immediately. And often when we use always and never, they're gross generalizations that heap in issues from the past. Well, I did empty the dishwasher last week. Okay, you got access to the computer first yesterday, whatever it might be. Right. Then now we're arguing about something that isn't really the issue. So starting with I is I'm taking responsibility for bringing up just the facts. I'm imagining that this is how it might be for you. So I'm building empathy. I'm looking at it from your perspective. Okay, so now we can maybe look at this situation together. And then that in turn lowers the reactivity or the need for reactivity in the other person because I'm not blaming. I'm not having yet another one of those conversations. I'm not blaming. And I'm genuinely trying to imagine the shoe on the other foot. It's all about keeping it safe. I feel I'm giving an honest, how this is what it's like for me and what I'd like or what I need. There are loads of examples of this on our Quest website. I think one of the best examples, and I'm going to borrow this example from one of my colleagues, Lance, who said that the first time he ever came to Quest, the gold that he took away was the I notice, I imagine, I feel. And he was living at home with his teenage, I think they were a lot of boys, and he used to come home and the place would be a mess. And he'd gone down the track before and making threats and doing this, and it always ended up in an argument. So he decided when he went home from Quest that he would try it a bit differently. And he tried some version of, look, I notice that when I go away for a few days and then I come home, that truth is, the place is pretty messy. The dishes haven't been done, the beds haven't been made, pile of dirty towels. I mean, those things are just there. I imagine it's just not a priority for you and you're out having a good time. But I feel annoyed and a bit disrespected. Really because we've had these conversations and we've made agreements in the past. I'm wondering if we could talk about it again. And he said that this made a huge difference, much to his surprise, that they really took this on board. And next time, they actually rang him up and said, oh, Dad, dishes are done, washing's done, And he said that this absolutely changed his relationship with these emerging adults. And I guess why it's so powerful is because you're talking to the adult part of the person rather than blaming, shaming, or punishing. You know, another one of my colleagues at Quest, when she tried this with her kids too, said, "Well, yeah, sure, I'm using that formula that I've got at Quest, but what would you prefer? I use this formula, or I punish you and say that you don't have access to your mobile phone for a week, or I ground you, or whatever. This is about me trying to collaborate with you. Can you come to the party? Like, what would you prefer?" So it can be hugely powerful, the I notice, I imagine, I feel. What I would say is make sure, however, you have dealt with your own emotions first. And that means making sure that you've got a degree of kind of control over your tone of voice and your body language. Because imagine the different ways that I can say I notice. Look, I notice. I notice. Look, I notice. Right? It's a different message. It's an absolutely different message. So again, when emotions are running high, 93% of all communication is non-verbal. Our words only account for 7%. So the other person's reading you from the tone of your voice and your body language. So we have to make sure that it matches, that it's congruent with the message that we're trying to impart. Hence, deal with your own emotion first and practice. So once you've got your I notice, I imagine, I feel, I would write it down. I wouldn't expect to get it right straight away. I would rehearse it in the mirror. I might run it by someone else, but I would rehearse till I had really got it clean before I deliver it. If you find you're going over the same issue again, like I've noticed this like so many times now, and we've talked about it so many times, and I'm still not getting any traction, then maybe we're dealing with it at the wrong level. Okay, so maybe the conversation now needs to move from the issue to the relationship. So the issue is the dishwasher, the wet towels, the fact that we've made an agreement. Okay, but to approach it then, to move to a relationship level, is then about saying what we're noticing is that we have had this conversation several times in the last month about access to the computer, using the workspace at home, sharing the workspace. And my understanding is we've made agreements that haven't been kept. I imagine there's all sorts of reasons for this. But I feel more and more frustrated by this and more concerned, because this is now making it difficult for me to trust that you will stick to agreements. So this is now becoming an issue around trust in our relationship. So we're dealing with the issue and the relationship. So sometimes when you notice that pattern, we've had this conversation many times now, sometimes we might need to shift gears and have another conversation. It's moved from the issue and it's moved to relationship. Okay. So we've now got our opening lines. We've started our conversation. We've said, can we put some time together to talk about this? Can we revisit our agreements? Whatever it might be. Here's some tips now for the ongoing conversation. All right. And I've got a little acronym that I use, and it's KISS, K-I-S, as opposed to double S. Keeping it safe. So this is the one priority that I'm going to keep in mind as I'm now entering into a conversation. My main aim is to keep this safe and to lower the defensiveness, to calm myself or take a break when I get triggered, and maybe even state those things as a few ground rules in the beginning. In order that this goes well, You know, maybe we need to take some regular breaks, or, you know, if we feel that there's too much emotion getting in, um, maybe we need to have time out or a little bit of a breather. So KISS, keeping it safe. The top thing is really, you've got your clean statement there, but really it's about listening. And isn't this the hardest thing to do at the times when it's most important? To 100% listen and remind yourself that listening 100% doesn't imply agreeing. I know I get caught out with this all the time. If I let this person keep on talking and not say anything, it's as if I'm agreeing. Okay, it's actually not. But if I hear the other person out, actually, it puts me in a much stronger position to be able to say, look, I've heard what you've got to say, and now I'm wondering if I can give you my perspective. Okay, so it's, I've heard everything you have to say, or I've listened to your perspective, and not but. But, have you thought about this? But you never hear me out. So it's where possible and not but. I've listened to your perspective, and I'm just wondering if you've considered this. I've listened to your perspective, and I'm wondering if we could look at it a different way. And not but. But the important thing is we really have listened. And show that you're listening through your body language and open body language, maintaining eye contact, nodding, making affirmative sounds. Yeah, okay, go on. Yeah, tell me a bit more. Encouragement. Okay. Clarifying, using clarifying questions that are open-ended. That means that they have more than yes or no answer, and that are got a non-judgmental tone. Look, when you said X, did you mean, can you tell me a little bit more about why? Paraphrasing, putting it into your own words, and then maybe summarizing. So, how I understand it is blah, blah, blah. Is that right? So, I want to make sure I've really got this. What you're saying is that sort of thing. Empathy building, acknowledging the feeling. This can be hard too, especially if you're feeling hurt and wounded. Now I've got to acknowledge someone else's feelings. Look, it sounds like you were really frustrated when I mentioned. It sounds as though you were annoyed when I asked if I could have the computer first. It sounds as though you were really angry when X, Y, Z. Remember, if you're starting to get triggered, take a break. As things move forward, notice and identify times where there's common ground. You know, what are the small things in this discussion that you both agree on? Well, okay, neither of us want this to continue. We both agree that working in the same room isn't working. We both agree that the kids need more supervision. We both agree that money is really tight right now, and it seems as though it's worrying both of us, maybe for different reasons, but it's worrying both of us. So can you notice here that the languaging is now starting to go from I to we? So we're starting to build a little bit of collaboration there. And maybe that's enough. Maybe for one discussion, that's enough. You know, that, okay, we've at least agreed on some things. Maybe we set a time to open this up again, or maybe we take a break now. So if we notice that we're starting to get a little bit more we language, and we can find things that we agree on, maybe we can start to problem solve. And it can be useful just to brainstorm. And it can also be a bit of a circuit breaker to have a pen and a bit of paper and write things down, okay? Because it means you don't have to be looking at each other all the time. Now remember, brainstorming is about not ruling anything out. Often the problem here, because we're still getting probably a little bit triggered, is that when we get a little bit triggered and when we're under stress, we tend to shut things down. We become a little bit more rigid and inflexible. And especially if one of the suggestions that's being made doesn't fit with our worldview or challenges our need to be right or something. So sometimes the suggestions can be a trigger in themselves. Try and resist ruling anything out. Okay, just non-judgmental, brainstorm. Everything is a possibility, and let's not stop till we get all the possible solutions down. Even if the solutions are ridiculous, you might get a laugh, and that certainly would release some tension. Okay, so yeah, get it all down there, and go hard on the problem, soft on the person. Okay, yeah, we're really going to nut this out, but we're not going into more conflict with each other. We want to be tough on the issue, soft on the person. Again, don't expect it all to happen at once. I mean, I'm talking about it here as if this is all going to magically happen in one session. It might not. It probably won't. You can go, well, we made a good start. I don't know about you. I'm shattered. What about we have a cup of tea? Okay, or I can sense that things are getting a little bit heated. Maybe we just take a break, go into our corners and regroup. Try and resist getting to solutions that you agree on too quickly. Even if you've got a few solutions that seem okay, maybe resist the temptation to make a final decision, because often we want to wrap it all up quite quickly because it's uncomfortable, or you think, right, it's going well, let's just wrap this up. And then you end up agreeing to something that isn't necessarily the best solution down the track. So maybe give yourself a cooling off period in some ways. So I'm wondering how this is landing. We've got a few minutes left, and there's only a couple of more key points I want to make. But I'm just wondering how this is landing. So I'm just going to have a little look here. So yeah, Mark's saying, yeah, I recognize this a lot. Glenn's had a little bit of a giggle when listening. And yes, Glenn, arguing with inanimate objects, absolutely. And also, I mean, my dishwasher stories like arguing with somebody that wasn't even there. How often do we do that? Do you have these arguments in the shower sometimes? You know, the best arguments I've had, the other person hasn't even been there. All the things I'm going to say, all the things I'm going to, getting that journal out of all the, old resentments and piling them in. Okay. So, yeah, and Pixie says that, yeah, some things have been validated for you. So that's great. I'm also interested to hear if you've got any top tips that you might use when there's conflict. I want to just kind of wrap up. I'll do a little bit of a summary. I might do that first. So a little bit of a summary. Are you in conflict's normal? Why wouldn't we have some extra tension given everything that we're going through right now? Conflict's about differences. There's different stages and levels of conflict, from discomfort through to crisis. The earlier you can try and resolve the conflict, the better. But deal with your own stuff first. Are you in conflict with yourself, or is there actually another person involved? What's your own style? What's your conflict resolution style? What's the style of the other person? Can you be more flexible? How can you prepare to have a challenging conversation after you've dealt with your own emotion first? How can you rehearse? How can you prepare? And then KISS, tips for keeping it safe, lowering the level of defensiveness and going from I language to we collaboration. Finally, I guess I'd just say to wrap up, just remembering to have an attitude of compassion for yourself, that we won't always get it right. I still react. Even when I think I've framed up something really well and really cleanly, we have no control over how it lands for the other person, and we often don't know the causes and conditions that are going on for them at that time. And so compassion for the other too. Everyone's doing it tough right now. Probably everybody's doing the best they can with what they've got under the current circumstances. Maybe look for what's working and emphasize that, as well as only having discussions about what's not working. It's easy when we're stressed to see all the things that are wrong. But maybe on a daily basis, we make a little practice of noticing what is working and what we're doing well, and given the circumstances, what's working well, and give an acknowledgement to that. And finally, conflict can often emerge when we haven't taken care of our own needs first. You know, if we haven't slept, if we haven't been eating properly, if we've dropped our little bit of exercise, if we haven't been doing our meditation, you know, all the things that can drop away when there's a little bit of stress happening, then often when we haven't met our own needs very well, sometimes that gets projected onto others. So just, again, that stuff that we talk about in Quest all the time, you know, as far as possible, making sure that your own bucket's filled up, you know. It's our responsibility to do that, taking care of our own needs first. So thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I've really enjoyed spending this time with you, and I hope that in some small way, conflict's such a big subject, but I hope in some small way we may have managed to cover some things that may be useful. And I wish you all the best for the remainder of the week, and until next time we meet, go safe and go well. Okay, bye-bye everyone.